Welcome back to Power CEOs, the truth behind the business. If you're just tuning in, you're going to want to go to nowmedia.tv, click on shows, go to Power CEOs and catch the first half of today's episode because it is pure gold. But without further ado, we're going to shift gears and talk about our AI moment of the week with our resident expert, Dr. Alan Badeau. Welcome back to the show.
Hi, Jen. It's great to be here.
You know, we've been talking a lot about AI the last couple of weeks, and it's a hot topic of conversation. But the questions that I am getting today, and have been really for the last couple of weeks, are how the heck much is this going to cost me? And how do I budget for it? So one of the things that I'm seeing is people are budgeting for the project cost, but they fail to consider what happens after implementation, or they budget the financial cost, but don't think about the teams they need and the training and that side of things. So I was hoping maybe you can shed a little light on what are the actual costs of an AI implementation.
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's something that I've had to deal with pretty much my entire career because AI from a financial perspective is really no different than any other innovation that you're trying to bring into the organization, except there are, really some personnel costs that go along with that are just completely forgotten about. And so, as you are starting, to look at these AI solutions, independent of what you want to use it for, there's really 4 or 5 factors that you've got to take into account. The first one is, do you have the expertise already? If you don't have the expertise and you're buying an AI product, then how you maintain it, how you train your people on it, how you deploy it, how do you continuously train it, how do you really take advantage of that becomes much more difficult. So looking at those, internally to say who's going to support this, and who's going to drive it when we need it, or who's going to fix the problem when we have an issue. That's step number one. The next one is, where are you going to run it? Is it in the cloud? Is it on-prem? Or if you're a government services provider, then it gets even more complicated. And so making sure that you have not only the infrastructure accounted for today, but where do you want to go with that is going to be very important, because if you scale quickly and you haven't budgeted for that, then your costs are going to skyrocket, and the CFO is going to go knocking on the CTO's door and say, what the heck are we doing here? So making sure that you look at those costs as well. The other thing is going to be around, how are you going to deploy it to your people? How are you going to train it? And where are you going to get the data from? Because like we've talked about so many times, data is the forgotten part of this. And so making sure that you can make it relevant to what your use case is going to be key. If you don't have anybody that can use the data that you have, that can train the data, that can prepare the data, that can get the data ready to go to wherever you're going to run your AI solution, that is not only important, but oftentimes will be the driver of your success, because you can spend an awful lot of money getting there. You can spend an awful lot of money on a tool, a lot of money on the infrastructure, but you're going to find out that if your data is not ready, you've wasted an awful lot of time, an awful lot of money, and you just can't get that back. And so those are the big drivers around what your costs are going to look like, and preparing for that 1, 2, 4 year 1, 3, 5 strategic roadmap on where you want to be. You've got to plan your costs along with that. Otherwise, you're going to have a partially deployed solution that doesn't work for anybody.
Or doesn't solve the problem you were hoping to solve, or creates more headache, hassle, etc. So I'm going to go to the next side of this puzzle, and that's really thinking about ROI. Because as executives, as CEOs, and entrepreneurs, what are we thinking about? We're like, oh, we look at all the bright side of, once this is integrated, what it's going to save us. But what I'm not finding that teams are really considering is how long to get to that ROI. So can you talk a little bit about how we as entrepreneurs and executives, everyone on this show, can start thinking about planning for that in a realistic time frame? Because I'll tell you what they think. They think they're going to spend the money. Somebody such as yourself is going to put a solution in, and then poof, they're going to have all this cash flow immediately. But that's just simply not how it works. Can you kind of talk to us a little bit about what is a realistic expectation of that ROI timeline?
Yeah, and I tell folks from a technical perspective, they have to, and I know this is going to sound very, very simple, but you have to define what success is. And then you have to tie your success that you have defined to your expectation for, your return on and your, that investment. Because, if it is, I want to increase capacity so my workforce can do more and I don't have to hire anybody, then what your ROI is going to be very different than if it's, I want to reduce the size of my workforce so that I can increase what my profit margins are. Those are two very different scenarios where ROI is still important, but how you get there is going to be very different because, not having some sort of definition means that as you are zigging and zagging through the deployment, the training, the learning, all those other things, then you're gonna try to take success and you're gonna shape it so that you can justify what that ROI is. And oftentimes that is most of the time it's the wrong way to do it because you're looking behind you and the things that you've done as opposed to looking forward. And so there's some very basic things that you can do along those lines. It's, you've got to make sure that your budget isn't out of control as you're deploying these things. Managing to a budget, having a good pipeline of AI successes and milestones that you hit, making sure that you're hitting those budgets, of course. But then as you deploy it into a production or an operational environment, then it becomes key to say, okay, I've hit my milestones. We're seeing good progress. We're seeing cost savings. Now, how do I want to accelerate those cost savings, or am I happy with where they are? That's really more of a framework as opposed to saying 9 months I'm going to be able to justify it. It's hard for anybody to be able to do that, especially with AI tools, because you don't know how they're going to perform. They may perform better than you think, or or worse. And so just making sure that you have a good strategy and a path that has those milestones. That's the important thing, as opposed to trying to hit just a number in a certain amount of time with these AI tools, because usually it doesn't go well, and then everybody's unhappy.
And the metrics, quite frankly, are very different depending on what it is you're hoping to accomplish. If you're hoping to reduce your workforce, that's a completely different metric because that's a productivity metric as opposed to a fiscal metric necessarily. Will it impact the bottom line? Yes, ultimately over time. But if you're looking at a volume capacity, it's also a different set of metrics. So talk to me a little bit about what can we do today if we're thinking about AI integration and its strategy planning time, its budget planning season? What should we be considering today as we meet with our boards or as we dial in our 2025 strategy so that we're considering all of these things? Give me just a high level 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 so that we can start that conversation for everyone who's watching.
Yeah, I would say the easiest thing to do is align it to your overall IT strategy that you have, or software development strategy, or whatever the industry is that you're in. I try to tell folks that AI, from a technology perspective and how you deploy it, should be treated no different than anything else. Now, how users use it is a very different story, of course, but how you are treating it, from deploying it, from using it, should be treated pretty much the same. And it should align to what your deliverables are, what your strategic goals are, how it's going to impact those goals, and really what your timeframes are around those. Because, if you're trying to play catch up, it's going to cost you a lot more money because you're just going to try to push and push and push and push. And your budget usually is going to get out of whack. If you take a step back, align it to your strategic plan that you have, keep in lockstep with that strategic plan, then you're your integration, your costs are going to be more controllable. You're not going to look like you're trying to do things that with your hair on fire and just trying to deploy as much as you can as quickly as you can. You know, aligning it to those processes that you have in place already is always going to be the smart play.
Perfect. I couldn't have said it better myself. I am so grateful for you here. And for each and every one of you, you heard it here. What do? You align your AI strategy to your strategic goals and initiatives. And you take a step back and ask yourself, am I ready? What do I need to do to prepare? Is my data ready? Make sure that you are set for success before you go in for the tool and the integration. And as Alan said, it's similar to any other technology automation, strategic deployment on the tech side, but it's very different on the people side. So don't forget to consider that as well. Alan, how can people reach out to you if they would like to learn more, if they would like to maybe consult with you about bringing something into their business? How can they reach you?
The easiest way is to go to my website, alanbadeau.ai, and you can reach me there, or you can watch me on Now Media and AI Today. It's we talk about topics similar to this, but from the technical side. And so I get a lot of emails and questions that way. I love answering them, and of course, find me on LinkedIn.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for being here again today.
Thanks.
And we will be right back after these messages.